Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Bill Eckstrom. He's a business owner, executive entrepreneur, and founder of Excel Institute. What really caught my eye about Bill is obviously there's so many TED Talks out there, but he has one in particular that really stood out, and I think you guys are going to absolutely love his message. But the title of that TED Talk is Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. And so we'll dive into that. But Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right. And Bill, so we start off every show with a favorite quote, maybe something that you've lived by, some sort of saying. So what do you got for us? And then what does that mean to you?
Good question. You know, Andrew, I think I would have to just go to the quote, actually, that's in the TED Talk by Dr. Serene Jones when she says, "The constant facade of order hides the wilderness that is craving to seep out and teach us that life wasn't created to be what we think it is. Beyond words, we must experience the wilderness to be taught what cannot be otherwise known."
And so what I'm getting from that is diving into the unknown, the constant facade of order, which sounds to me like comfort, sounds to me like what we already know.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's well said. It is. As human beings, we're suited for comfort. We strive for it. We look for predictability in our personal lives and business and everything we do. And the challenge of that, while it is comfortable, one of the things we know is that we only grow in a state of discomfort. And that's the quandary we all face day in and day out.
So it's one thing when you say this, it's okay, yeah, I know, I get it. We only grow in a state of discomfort. But why is it that we are constantly we are resisting that discomfort and we are wanting to come back and almost fight for comfort? Like even this morning, even with myself, just being honest, I woke up this morning and I was like, oh man, a little early. Wish I got an extra hour there. And it's so easy just to pull up the comforters and just 30 more minutes, but you got to fight for that, the discomfort of getting up and hitting the appointments that you said you're going to commit to.
Right. Well, yeah. And Andrew, I think that's a great everyday example of it. But it's also the order that leads to comfort. Order, one of the definitions, one of the outcomes is it's predictable. And in predictability, comfort is found. But there's order in way more than what you just described, because you're right. I have those same ordered pattern routines in the morning. But we forget that order is also the way we think about something, the way we view the world, especially around emotional topics like politics, social issues, religion, are all areas where people seem to have strong opinions. And the more interested in sharing with you their opinion, their thoughts, or supporting their beliefs, as opposed to being uncomfortable and saying, hey, why don't you tell me more about why you think that way? Because the more we think a certain way, gets back to the physiological aspects of our brain. The neural pathways get deeper and wider. It's harder to think differently. So we even create order in the way we think.
Yeah, I think we're trying to do it because it makes our life easier. We don't have to think. It's almost like unconscious. It's almost on autopilot.
Right. Yeah. And that's not always evil. I mean, when you think about it, I love the order of going through an airport. I have a very strong order, the way I put my driver's license, my passport in certain places, and my phone, and everything has a spot because it has a highly predictable outcome that I like. And that's all right, So you're right. It's kind of a conscious, subconscious selection of comfort when outcomes are predictable.
Yeah. So why do you say that comfort will ruin your life? It's such a bold, it's like, wow, like that's why I clicked on it. I was like, wow, comfort will ruin my life. And, why do you say that?
I say that because it gets back to my statement earlier. We only grow in a state of discomfort. And when all we do is stay in comfort, we're not growing. And as you know, I mean, you're a walking example of it, Andrew. Comfort leads to plateauing. Plateauing leads to stagnation. And stagnation is to decline. And that's where lives are ruined. That's where biologically ecosystems are ruined. I mean, it gets way beyond us, but it absolutely does ruin our life. Part of me, it's the fact that I am a fanatic about growth. And if we're not growing, we're dying. And perhaps as cliche as that sounds, that's what I believe.
Does this stack, such as like you said, comfort leads to plateauing, which leads to stagnation, which leads to declining? Does this stack like an avalanche where it starts slow, and then boom, it's really starting to grow and it just starts overwhelming your life? And that's when we start seeing someone perhaps where many different aspects of their lives feel like it's falling apart.
You're making me think. That's a good question. I think it depends on what it is. There are some things that can escalate and decline quickly. I mean, from a business perspective, look no further than Blockbuster Video, right? I think it was 2003 or 4. They had roughly $5.8 billion in revenue or something like that. And 4 years later, they're bankrupt. That quickly spiraled out of control. But then there are other things that we do physiologically, maybe weightlifting. Same thing. If you do the same thing over and over again, eventually you plateau, and then you can actually go backwards in it unless you are always changing up the routine and the patterns. So it depends on the circumstance, depends it's in business, depends it's personal, depends on whether it's high tech. There's a lot of instances, but we all know eventually if you're stuck in order, it leads to no growth.
And if we're stuck in that order, I'm thinking like when I had a job and I was really going after that order of, okay, I have a good job, I've got benefits, I'm getting this amount every month, I know how much I'm getting, and I know likely in 6 months what I'll be making too. And in that process, I was starting to go unconscious, where I was just all I had to do was just show up at work and I would be taken care of. But in order for me to break out of that, I had to become conscious, and I had to really start opening my eyes, and I had to make a conscious effort to get out of there. And it was not easy, and it was not this, oh, let's just quit. And then it was really hard to have the power to walk away from something that was absolutely, in many people's eyes, really great.
Yes, I think that's well said, Andrew. You know, this getting out of comfort, what we call is the movement into complexity, where outcomes are unknown, and it's the unknown that leads to discomfort. But, you know, you made a conscious decision. What we call it is you triggered complexity. You triggered growth on your own. For me, the example I use in the TED Talk is I got fired. So I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a say. But yes, back to your point earlier, we find ourselves, and now, of course, when you're in the moment, it's very hard to realize. But looking back,
yeah,
man, I was stuck in order. To your point, same job, same routine, same page. You know, you had all these things in place. You just become blind to it.
Do you think that we naturally just gravitate towards that? Like, even if you become really conscious and you start pursuing this business opportunity and you're going after it, are you really going after order again?
You know, that's a good question. Again, I think yes, to answer your question. I think that is what we go for. However, I think that evolves. It can evolve. And I'll use myself as an example. I have trained my brain to consciously acknowledge order and discomfort. And my decisions are much more intentional about which path I go. And part of that is when I feel discomfort, when it literally, like in the pit of your stomach, you can actually pause I think, what is it that's causing that? And more times than not, almost all times, it's because there's an outcome that's unknown. And that's what creates discomfort in our lives. And you can elect to remove that and go back to your order, or you can elect to continue with it, even though outcomes are unknown.
Yeah. This also, during the same time, I ended up breaking up with a girlfriend, and this conversation is completely, the comfort of a relationship where it's okay, nothing's really bad, but to make a conscious decision and to realize that this wasn't serving me in the way that where I wanted to go and where I was growing. I feel this same conversation in business, in relationships applies, I think, also in trying to get my butt into the gym consistently. I think that conversation's a daily struggle. I think this conversation applies to all aspects of our lives.
Andrew, there's no question you're right. I remember as a kid, my parents would talk about, which I grew up in a pretty idyllic childhood.
Okay.
But like my parents, like everybody's, they had their moments, they had their spats. And I remember my mom telling me when I was younger that, hey, that makes us healthier. And I could never figure that out. But now it does make sense that it's those moments of challenge that make us wiser, they make us stronger. That is those complex moments. And also the complexity of figuring ourselves out, Andrew. I think we need to really, we're brought up in I was and you were, I think societally, we're brought up to always take care of other people and take care of yourself last. And I think that's backwards. That the bigger challenge is growing myself. And when I do that, I become more powerful with other people, the stronger I get. And I really believe that if you believe the performance of a team is a reflection of how that team is coached, led, and managed, that means if I want my team to grow, I have to be a better coach, better leader, better manager. So if we start, like you said, if you start with ourselves, you'll be shocked at the trickle-down impact it can have to all those around us.
Yeah. How many areas of life should we be pursuing this discomfort? So I want to try and find some balance where maybe is it wise to pursue it in one or two areas of our lives, or should all areas of our lives, if we're pursuing this discomfort because we want to grow, of course, as men, but after a certain point, it can become really overwhelming if we're just all areas of our life is, in discomfort.
You're right. That's a brilliant question, because you can't be in a state of complexity, in a state of discomfort in every area of your life. There are balances that we always need to find. But, professionally, I always am seeking some discomfort somewhere. Now, do I live every aspect of my professional life in discomfort? Oh, heck no. I mean, coming on this call today, Andrew, with you is a little bit of discomfort, quite frankly, because it would have been so much easier to just go about my normal day, my normal routine. So even being on the phone with you creates a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of complexity. Physiologically, I think we always need to create complexity in our lives to some degree. I mean, if you work out, if you lift weights, for example, the simple act of lifting weights and tearing muscles creates complexity, creates discomfort and growth. So I think there always has to be a component of our lives in all the different aspects where there is some complexity and discomfort, but not all areas of our lives. Or let me rephrase it, not all of those moments within that area.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a time to hit each point, and each area of your life, you're giving it your full attention, and so you're able to actually get the results that you're looking for. Otherwise, I think that it can be really overwhelming if you take, do a life audit and look at your health and your career and your relationships and your friends, and you're just like, oh my gosh, and you're trying to do it all. I think you're human and you can be overwhelmed. And I think that conversation isn't talked about a lot in personal growth communities. But you mentioned the lifting weights, and I think lifting weights is a great example of growth, because we all know that when you're lifting weights and when you feel that burn, that we don't associate that burn with something bad is happening to my body. We know that burn is that's what we're going for. We're going for a little bit of that burn. We don't feel good leaving the gym, and we didn't get a little burn in the muscles when we were lifting weights, because that obviously meant that you were lifting weight that was challenging you. You were lifting just beyond how much you could lift. It's not like you lift weights, it burns, and then you drop it like you just got stung by a bee, and you're just like, what's that? I didn't know that was going to happen. Like, and you drop it, and you're like, I didn't know it was going to hurt, and you leave the gym. And but I think in other areas of our life, we do that where it burns a little, and then we drop the weight. It could be in a relationship or business, and then we go back to comfort. We go back to where there's no burn.
Right. And that's very well said, by the way. Yes, that's exactly right. It's the burn that helps us grow. Without it, we're not growing. And so many of us will avoid growth for comfort as opposed to growing in discomfort. And if we just did nothing more than acknowledge that statement, I really believe, like myself, that people will consciously choose the discomfort route, not all the time, but more often. They really believe that statement.
Yeah. I'm wondering, how do you handle risk? It's such a simple question, conversation. I've asked it many times before, but I really feel like just taking one key risk can make a boring year an amazing year. Where if you look back at 2016 and you look at like the highlights of 2016 or just this last year, if you're listening to this in the future, well, I'm sure that whatever led to that year being great or interesting, that you could trace it back to some key risk. And so I find that whenever I'm bored or I'm just not really growing that much, I start looking for opportunities to take a key risk. And so I'm wondering, on your end, Bill, how do you handle risk, or how do you manage risk? What conversation do you have with yourself when you're about to take a big risk?
Risk is so different for so many people. So personally, it's interesting. People will say, "Hey, Bill, you're a good risk taker, or you're a risk taker, or you're spontaneous," and I disagree with that to actually a great extent, because what they view as spontaneity, what they don't see is all the due diligence I've done up to that point. And I just don't talk about my due diligence. I just do it. And so when a decision is made, it's rarely a decision I made in the moment, but it could be weeks or months or even years in the planning. So I think what's risky to me is different. Well, I know for a fact it's different than what's risky to my son. So I evaluate risk more than anything based on my passions, if that makes sense, Andrew. If it's something I'm passionate about, I'll take the risk. And it's usually not so much financially driven. I mean, that's a component of it. But if I'm passionate about it, I'm a lot more willing to step out of my order into that area. Because if I'm not passionate about it, it seems like it just won't work. It won't succeed. So I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but
it reminds me, I believe it's Warren Buffett who said it's only risky if you don't know what you're doing.
That sounds like something he would say, yes.
Right. And so you're saying you're really reducing a lot of the risk if you're doing the due diligence beforehand. So really in that decision, you can get caught though, where the paralysis by analysis of looking for that right decision. What should I do? Should I do this? Should I take this action? But then this will happen, to the point where you're so far away from taking action because you're just overwhelmed with knowledge and content, which is unlimited at this point.
Right. So, I get people will give me credit for starting this business.
Okay.
Well, that was a risk. But keep in mind, I got fired. I started this business simply because, I woke up the day after I got fired and said to myself, I will never allow that to happen again in my life, because I'll never work for somebody again.
Was it unexpected when you got fired? Were you rocking and rolling at work, or did you kind of know?
No. There was no writing on the wall. There was nothing that happened. It just, as I said in the TED Talk, walked into a conference room with the president of the company and said, we're doing a reorg and you're not in it. And it was just, whoa. So there was no writing on the wall whatsoever.
In that moment, did you try and save your job? Did you try and add value and say, hey, no, this is wrong. I can do this. Or did you accept it and go?
I have never been asked that question before. It's the latter. I did not try and save it. I wouldn't have. That's not my MO. I said, I had one question. I said, is it a performance issue? And he looked at me in the eye and he said, no, it's not. And that was it. Then I said, all right, I'm out.
And that was, I believe, based on your talk, that you were there for a long time.
Yeah, multiple years. Uh-huh.
Okay. Why do you think you just accepted it? Why do you think you didn't fight for the job or try and, wiggle your way into a new position?
Well, you're asking good questions. I would say right, wrong, or indifferent. Part of it's pride. I'm not going to beg for anything.
Right.
That's not who I am. So if you don't see the value in what I do or how we do it, then it's not a good fit. So I'm not going to ask for something like that back. I think that's the biggest reason, Andrew, would be pride.
Yeah. So on that drive home, I'm wondering and curious, were you scared? Were you excited? You also have a family. Did you have a family at this time?
Yes.
Okay.
Wife and 3 kids.
So they're probably obviously younger. So what was that drive home like? I remember my drive home, and it was, I'll share it after you because I'm not sure how yours was.
It sucked.
Okay.
Yeah. It was not comfortable in the least bit. I was bordering on chaos, even perhaps shooting beyond complexity. It was to come home and tell your wife and kids.
Did you tell them immediately, or did you hide it and try and reframe it into something?
No, it was, I came home, walked in the door, my wife looked at me, come on, I worked 12-hour days, I was working my rear end off. It's just what I do. Uh-huh. I walked in the door about 3:30.
Oh, something's wrong.
Said, oh, hey, what are you doing? And I said, I just got fired. And she stood there and looked at me, and I said, yes, you heard me right. And I went upstairs, and I, as I say in the TED Talk, I curled up in my bed in the fetal position. And then several hours later, the kids were all home from school and nobody knew what was going on. And I just walked downstairs and called the kids into a meeting and said, hey, something you need to know. Dad lost his job today at work. And it wasn't my choice. The company made the choice to get rid of me. But I also said, I want you to know I'm going to be okay and that we're going to be okay. And we'll make something happen. And that was pretty much it. How did yours go?
Oh man, I'll come back to that. But in that moment when I want to commend you and respect you for handling it that same day, where I think that, some people just they would leave for the day as if they were going to work because they don't want to have that conversation with their family yet.
Yeah, I guess I never thought of that, Andrew, any other way, but to just be as candid with them as I would always want them, and hopefully taught them to be with me. So, no, I didn't feel like there was anything to hide. It wasn't easy, but I couldn't. I just would not never felt right hiding it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for mine, when I quit, and this is not, for the audience about quitting your job episode, this is just a conversation about risk and getting out of your comfort zone. And this seems to be where the conversation is trending. But when I quit my job, I was extremely excited. And I remember rolling down the windows. It was the summer in San Diego. And I remember it was really hot, and I turned on the radio, and I felt like I hadn't been in the sun in so long because I've always been working inside the store. I was a retail manager during the day. And so for me to be driving with windows down, sunny, and then on the radio was AC/DC, and I just remember it like blasting, and it was, I was driving, and then I ended up home, and I was really excited for about a couple days. And then just like you crawled into the fetal position. I just remember waking up in the fetal position and just thinking, what the hell? What just happened? What did I do? And then I started getting that buyer's remorse and, thinking about, oh man, should I try and get my job back? What happened? Should I tell them I wasn't feeling right? And I think this really leads to, so you have the C I think it's the C factor here, where you have chaos, complexity, order, and stagnation. I think what we're describing here really fits into this model you have. So I think it'd be great if you could share this model for the audience to better understand.
Yeah. So the model is called the growth rings, and they really explain environments that either promote or hinder growth. And as we were talking about earlier, Andrew, the order environment is where most people reside. It's where it's what we want. We want predictable outcomes.
Right.
Complexity is where we know what goes in, but we've changed it so outcomes are unpredictable. And so what we refer to it as is triggering complexity for growth. You, in your example, you triggered complexity yourself. Right. You quit your job. You knew what the inputs were, but you didn't know what the outcomes were going to be. For me, I got fired. Someone else triggered complexity in my professional life for me, right? When we work out, we were talking about that earlier, we're triggering complexity ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's always this long-term trickle-down impact anytime we choose complexity as well. And I think in the TED Talk, I used the Claudette Colvin example of triggering complexity and the long-term impact and the trickle-down effect it can have.
Yeah, I think when you trigger it, you're creating that opportunity for yourself. And I think that's a part, or someone else, I guess, can trigger it too, like in your case, or if perhaps if someone breaks up with you or does something in the relationship, it really triggers that complexity. And so is it natural for us to want to drive towards order, or if we don't drive, do we fall back into chaos?
Ooh, that's a good question. Typically, what we see when people get in chaos is they crave order. They typically want to come all the way back into having order in their lives. And that's in chaotic environments. When complexity is triggered, yes, I think it's also a human nature to get rid of it. But that's my point of earlier, is we need to acknowledge it. And when it's appropriate, stay there. And I used the example in the TED Talk of my daughter that plays tennis. And when she was having those challenges on the court, as a dad, as a parent, so many times your visceral instinct is to go bail your kids out. And that's wrong. And what we talk about now, we talk about it at work, we talk about it at home, is do you care enough to create discomfort? Now think about that. Do you care enough to let your kids remain uncomfortable? Do you care enough to, when you see that everything is comfortable and rosy and things are so ordered at work, do you care enough to disrupt it to make some people uncomfortable because you know growth can occur? Now, that's a different way to view the world. That's a different way to think about relationships. And by the way, that's what we see when we study high-performing coaches and managers, is they care enough to create discomfort.
How often should someone care enough to create discomfort in their life to pursue a higher level of growth?
Personally, or with those around us?
Personally.
Well, Andrew, does it ever stop? At what point do any of us ever say, I am a finished product?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 55 years old. I feel like my best work is still out in front of me. And I don't mean that in cliche fashion. I mean that quite literally. My best work is still coming, and I can't wait to get there.
This made me think, really interesting, because you said, you question, like, when should we stop, right? When should we stop growing? And I think, imagine a company, let's say Apple, at the top of the chain here in technology, just decided to stop growing, meaning advancing their technology. Like, I think we could all agree that, they'll probably do okay, actually, for a while. But slowly they would start losing market, and slowly they would become very boring and they would become outdated as other companies would rise and take over whatever the phone market, tablet market. And so I think if we view ourselves in this way and like, you know, a new phone, I'm bringing this up because I just got an email earlier before this interview that I'm up for an upgrade. Well, right. Because a new phone is coming out every year. They're constantly evolving and upgrading, and they're constantly up-leveling their products. And I think we should view ourselves in that same way, where we're constantly upgrading. Otherwise, we'll become outdated.
Exactly. Andrew, and that's a great analogy. And that's exactly what I'm referring to when we talk about order and complexity. It's, you know, it's not just physiologically, but it's psychologically as well. It's being able to step back and look at the way we act, the way we behave, the way we think, and then really challenge ourselves to think just like you described with high-tech companies and Apple and phones. When's the last time we've evolved?
Right. Yeah. You know, are we operating on a system that we've been running on since the 90s?
Right.
Like, is that where we are in our personal growth?
Exactly. And it's hard to do. And it's like we talk about it. We talk like it sounds easy, but it's not.
Right.
Especially, as I said earlier, when you get into issues like religion, politics, social issues, things like that. It's really, really hard to evolve your thinking that way, but it can be done.
Yeah. This is a great episode here on pursuing that discomfort to continue growing in your life. And Bill, I want to dive into now the knowledge round. I'm just going to ask you some rapid fire questions here. So Bill, are you ready for the knowledge round?
Andrew, I was born ready.
All right. My first question for you, Bill, is what advice do you have for someone who's feeling really lost or kind of unsure of their purpose?
To start with your passions. It's something that not enough people do, but figure out, go discover what you're passionate about, what you care about. That is the foundation of success and growth.
What do you think is holding most men back from becoming stronger, grounded men today?
Lack of focus on themselves.
And where, just a side question, where do you think they are focusing their attention mostly?
I think more on their physical selves, and less on their psychological selves. We have a strong tendency to take care of everything below the neck. Very little above the neck.
Yeah, that's very true. And now, what would you say have been 3 of your most influential books that have helped you on your journey, and why?
Okay, good question. The Gallup's early book that was put out by Kurt Kaufman and Marcus Buckingham on First Break All the Rules, what the world's greatest managers do differently. That was an affirmation to my thoughts on leadership and coaching. And they brought science to it, and I loved that. Change or Die was another book that really got me thinking so deeply about human behavior and something what we call, our company refers to as intellectual understanding versus emotional readiness, meaning that we can intellectually understand something, but if we're not emotionally ready to change, it doesn't matter. The third book, it's by a sports psychologist in Toronto, Canada. A gentleman's become a friend of mine. His name is Dr. Peter Jensen. And the name of his book is, I'm drawing a blank on it now. I even have it in my bookshelf, and it's of all the books I have tattered and marked up and pages turned. It's called Igniting the Third Factor. And that was a great book on performance and coaching.
Really good books. I'll have to check out the Change or Die and the books you mentioned here. Now, moving on here, next question's more of a scenario for you, Bill. Imagine you had 60 seconds with your 20-year-old self and kind of think about where he's at personally, professionally, relationships, and knowing what you now know today. If you had 60 seconds with him, what would you tell him to do? What would you tell him not to do?
Pause, be humble, be less quick to act, and more quick to think.
Yeah, just letting that settle in. Sometimes people say the opposite, more acting, more thinking, but you're saying the other. And I think there's 2 sides to the coin there. I think that's very valuable. Now, what would you say, even if you have to summarize some of your main points here, is your philosophy on life and success?
That we have to take care of our complete self. And I'm not promoting a religion of faith or anything, but I think there's a spiritual side of ourselves that we really need to nurture and constantly develop. The physical side goes without saying, although it's arguably just as challenging professionally as well. Those three areas of our lives, I think, are areas that we need to continually look for discomfort in order to continue growing. Just that. And when we do that, when I'm healthier spiritually, physically, professionally, everything is better. My relationships are better with my parents, with my kids, with my wife, at work. Everything just seems to click. And I wish I could tell you for sure why, but all I know is it works.
So for someone right now listening who knows they need to pursue some discomfort, some serious discomfort, they need to make a decision, perhaps take a big risk, and they're struggling because they know that it's going to put them into a lot of uncertainty and they're going to have to enter that unknown path. What advice do you have for that person right now?
I'll quote a wise friend of mine who said, I would say, regardless of the outcome, whether you believe the outcome is positive or negative, my advice is the outcome didn't happen to you, but it happened for you.
All right. And just letting that sink in for the guy who's really trying to make a decision right now. And what would you want him to take away from that? This is happening not to you, but for you.
Meaning that meaning when I go into complexity, if I take a risk, the outcome may not be what I intended it to be. Now, I can view that as negative and get mad and irritated and let it ruin me or ruin my life. Or I can take the attitude that happened for me and how am I growing from it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So much of life is you have no option but to take that because not everything's going to be certain. Even when you do all the math and do all the research before you take an action, you're not entitled to the outcome, but to the effort.
Right. Yes. Right. And if that lesson is worthy, I can make it worthy. Yeah. And that's the other thing I've learned is take control and make sure every outcome is for me, but not to me. And when that happens, man, you'd be shocked as how many things turn positive in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost feels like to me, it feels like that Bruce Lee quote where he says like, you kind of like flow like water, don't try and fight the wall, just flow around the wall. So whatever bad is happening to you, you can flow around and find the lesson, find the victory, find the good in it. And you'll be able to move forward and take that with you on the journey.
Right. It's funny if you take the time to think about it, meditate about it. I could sit here and tell you, just like in the TED Talk, Andrew, that I wouldn't be on the phone with you today if I hadn't gotten fired some years ago. Now think about that. You and I wouldn't be doing this had that event not happened. You and I wouldn't be on the phone today had you not quit your job.
Right.
It's not what happened to me. It's what happened for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the listeners too, I mean, there's probably something that happened that led you to want to pursue and listen to a personal development audio program. And you found something like this, which also led you to listening to a lot of other guys on here and women who share really great stuff. And I'm sure that's had a tremendous impact on your life too, listening to this. So I think all these decisions, whether we think they're good or bad, there's a prize, there's a massive lesson inside of all of them.
Yes, I think that's very well said, Andrew. I really do.
All right. And that concludes the knowledge round there, Bill. So I'm curious, just even on a personal level, what's exciting you now today? Like what's getting you out of bed in the morning?
A book. We just got accepted to publish a book on the impact of coach on performance. What is it great coaches do? What is it? How do they create discomfort to keep individuals and teams growing? That is a primary motivator. It's just our work overall, always studying the science of performance and growth. Every day I get up and I never, as cliche as it sounds, but I don't go to work. I get to go explore growth with the team of people. So those are things that keep me going. The fallout, that's probably very poorly worded. The result of the TED Talk has been mind-blowing. Nobody, I don't think, ever comes into a TED Talk thinking that they're going to have the result that we did. And so now that it happens, you try and figure out how to work with it, how to deal with it, the different speaking requests that come of it. Let's face it, my ability to be with you on the phone today is because of that too. So there's just been some,
that's fantastic. It's a great talk. It's short, it's simple, it's very, very powerful. I recommend all the listeners to go to YouTube and search for it. Basically, Bill Eckstrom, Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. And do you have a release date on the book that you're coming out with, or is it still in the works?
Should be late summer.
Okay.
Should be
late summer. We can all go to Amazon, check out Bill Eckstrom. Also, currently now you can go to excellinstitute.com to learn more about Bill's work, and that's ECSELL institute.com. I would just put it in Google. It pops right up. And you could also Google Bill Eckstrom, and it pops right up too, so the audience can follow up with you. Bill, it's been a pleasure having you here on the show and sharing your story and being vulnerable about the post losing the job, and sharing that story. You said I haven't been asked these questions before, and sharing those answers here with my community. In addition to all the invaluable pieces of wisdom you've shared.
Well, Andrew, you're very, very kind, and if you could see me right now, I'm just smiling. You've got a nice gift about what you do. You've asked some very profound questions, some very thoughtful questions that have been fun to answer. So the pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for providing this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes, because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of knowledgeformen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.